It wasn't like I planned to embarrass Luke. Honestly, it just kind of happened. But looking back, I guess I've always had this, edge when it comes to him. My name's Rachel. I'm 35, and if I had to, describe myself in one word, it'd probably be blunt. Some people, Luke included, might call it being difficult, but I see it as being, honest. Life's too short to sugarcoat things, right? Here's the thing about Luke. His hairline has been, retreating like it's losing a war. He's only 38, but it started years ago, around the time our youngest Mason was born. I didn't say anything about it back then because, well, what kind of wife would I be if I pointed out every little flaw? Plus, he was, trying to fight it, using those fancy shampoos and doing those weird scalp massages at night like some kind of, hopeful ritual. It was kind of cute in a pathetic way. Fast forward to last week at the Christmas party. Our neighbor Laura, bless her Pinterest perfect soul, hosts this huge thing every year. It's always the event, twinkling lights, way too much food, and one of those ridiculously perfect charcuterie boards that makes you feel underdressed no matter what you wear. I spent half the day stressing about what to wear because, I like to look good. Luke doesn't get it, though. He's the kind of guy who thinks one of his 3 plaid shirts is effort enough. Spoiler alert, it's not. So we get there and, everything's fine. I'm on my second glass of wine because let's be real, what's a party without a little buzz? When Luke makes this comment about our vacation budget. I don't even remember the specifics, just that it was one of those, judgy things he says when he's feeling all frugal. Are you sure we can afford that, Ratch? Something about his tone, it just, rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was Laura's perfect house staring me in the face, but I felt this, need to knock him down a peg. Before I even realized it, I laughed and said, "Oh, don't worry. Luke's saving plenty by skipping trips to the barber." The room went, silent for half a second, and then people started laughing. Not all of them, just those, polite chuckles people give when they're not sure if it's okay to laugh. But Luke? He looked like I'd just, kicked his dog. He tried to smile, but I could tell I'd hit a nerve. And instead of feeling bad, I, felt victorious. I don't know why I do that. Luke's not a bad husband. He's steady, dependable, the kind of guy who always makes sure the bills are paid and the car's running. But, maybe that's the problem. He's so predictable, it's suffocating sometimes. I guess I just wanted to shake him to, prove he has more going on under the surface than weather apps and spreadsheets. The rest of the night, Luke barely spoke to me. I figured, he'd get over it, he always does. But the next morning, he got up early and left without a word. And when he came back, his head was, completely bald. Smooth as glass. First, I didn't even recognize him. Mason actually cried when he saw him, which was, a little dramatic, but it kind of mirrored what I felt inside. 'Cause now, with the hair gone, there was no undoing it. My little joke had officially gone too far. Luke didn't say much that day. He just went about his routine like nothing had changed. But, the tension between us? It was thick, really thick. Every time I looked at him, I felt this weird mix of guilt and stubbornness. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. He'd been talking about shaving his head for a while, right? So, maybe my comment just, sped things up. But deep down, I knew better. And that little voice in my head kept whispering, "You didn't have to say it like that." Still, I couldn't bring myself to apologize. Partly because I didn't think it was entirely my fault. He was the one being so, sensitive about his hair. And partly because, well, I hate admitting when I'm wrong. That night, we went to bed without saying much. Luke didn't kiss me goodnight or roll over to his usual side. And, as much as I wanted to blame him for overreacting, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd finally pushed him too far. The next morning was painfully normal. Except for the tension. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, scrolling through his tablet like always. But there was something about the way he sat, rigid, stiff, that made it clear he wasn't over what happened. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, trying to act casual. Finally, I said, "The new look's not so bad, you know." Makes you look, distinguished. He didn't even glance up. Thanks, he said flatly. That one-word response felt like a slap. Luke wasn't the type to give the silent treatment, and I couldn't decide if he was being, childish or if I actually deserved it. Are we really gonna do this? I asked, leaning back in my chair. You're mad because I made a joke? It wasn't even that serious. That's when he looked up. His eyes were sharp, and his voice was quiet but firm. Not that serious, he repeated. Rachel, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. You didn't just make a joke, you took a shot at something you know I'm insecure about. And you didn't even hesitate. I felt my defensiveness kick in immediately. Oh, come on, Luke. You're acting like I caused some huge scene. It was a light-hearted comment, and everyone laughed. He leaned forward slightly, his voice rising just a bit. Do you even understand how that felt? You know how I've been struggling with this. And instead of supporting me, you made me the butt of a joke at a party. In front of all our friends. My stomach twisted, but I wasn't ready to back down. You're the one who decided to shave it all off the next day, I said, crossing my arms. I didn't tell you to do that. That's not the point, Rachel. He set his mug down a little harder than necessary. The point is you didn't think about how it would make me feel. You never do. You just say whatever pops into your head, and I'm supposed to laugh it off like it doesn't hurt. His words stung, mostly because I couldn't deny them. But instead of admitting that, I doubled down. Oh, so now I'm the villain? I'm sorry if you're, sensitive, Luke, but I didn't mean anything by it. I can't walk on eggshells every time I open my mouth. Luke shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You always do that, he said quietly. You dismiss what I'm feeling like it's my fault for having emotions. But if I said something like that about you, about your weight or your hair, you'd never let me hear the end of it. That hit a nerve. My cheeks flushed and I shot back. That's completely different. You know how hard I've worked to lose the baby weight. And you think I haven't tried to deal with my hair? He interrupted, his voice louder now. You think I wanted this? You think I like feeling like I'm getting older, like I'm less attractive to you? His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. To me, his hair was just hair. But to him, it was obviously something much bigger. Till admitting I was wrong? Not exactly my strong suit. You're still attractive to me, I said, softer this time but still defensive. You're my husband, Luke. I wouldn't have married you if I didn't love you. That's not the point, Rachel, he said, sighing and rubbing his smooth scalp. It's about respect. I don't feel like you respect me sometimes. And the worst part is, I don't think you even realize it. That word, respect, hung in the air like a challenge. I felt my walls go up immediately. That's not fair, I said, crossing my arms tighter. I do respect you. I don't know, Luke. I'm not the kind of person who sugarcoats things. You've always known that about me. He looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, Yeah, I've always known. But it's different when it's coming from my wife. The one person who's supposed to have my back is the same person who tears me down. Those words hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to argue, but for once, nothing came out. 'Cause I knew he was right. That night, Luke slept on the couch. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything he'd said. His words weren't loud or angry, they didn't need to be. They stuck with me because, well, he wasn't wrong. But, knowing that didn't make it any easier to admit. The next morning, the silence between us was almost unbearable. Luke got ready for work without saying much, just the usual don't forget Mason's soccer practice as he walked out the door. I told myself this would blow over. It always did. But something about this time felt different. Over the next week, the tension didn't ease. If anything, it got worse. Luke started coming home later, saying he had meetings or was working on deadlines. I knew his job as an accountant could be demanding, but, this felt deliberate, like he was avoiding me. When he was home, we barely spoke. Conversations were short and transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? Or Mason needs new cleats. No jokes, no casual banter, just business. I hated it. One evening after dinner, I decided I'd had enough. I sat down next to him on the couch and said, "We need to talk." Luke glanced up from his phone, then back down. "About what?" "About us," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He sighed, setting his phone aside. "Okay. Talk." I hesitated for a moment, then said, "I feel like you're, pulling away. Like you're still mad about what happened at the party." He raised an eyebrow. "You feel like I'm pulling away?" "Rachel, I've been pulling away for years. You're just now noticing." That caught me off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, crossing my arms. "It means this isn't just about the party," he said, his tone steady but firm. "It's about the constant little jabs, the way you dismiss me, the way you always have to be the sharpest one in the room. It's exhausting, Rachel." "I'm exhausted." My defenses went up immediately. "I'm not the only one who takes little jabs, Luke," I said. "You think you're so perfect because you keep a spreadsheet of every penny we spend and never lose your temper. But guess what? That doesn't make you better than me. It makes you boring." Luke stared at me, his expression unreadable. "So that's what you think of me," he said quietly. "I'm boring." "That's not what I meant," I said quickly, though, it kind of was. "Yes, it is," he said, standing up. "And maybe you're right. Maybe I am boring. But at least I don't tear you down every chance I get. At least I try to build a life we can be proud of. And if that makes me boring, then fine." "Luke," I started, but he shook his head. "I can't do this anymore, Rachel," he said. "I can't keep feeling like I'm never enough for you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice trembling. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I think we need some space," he said. "I don't know if this is fixable, but I can't keep living like this." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back. "So, what, you're just giving up?" I said, my voice sharp even though I didn't mean for it to be. "I'm not giving up," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "But I can't keep being the only one trying." With that, he grabbed his keys and left the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sinking feeling in my chest. The next few weeks were strange. Luke stayed with a friend and we communicated only about the essentials, Mason's schedule, bills, stuff like that. First, I thought it was temporary. I told myself he just needed to cool off, that he'd come home once he realized he was being, dramatic. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to realize this wasn't just a cooling-off period. This was serious. One night, I overheard Mason on the phone with Luke. He was asking when Dad was coming home, and Luke's response, "I don't know, buddy," made my stomach drop. I wanted to call him, to beg him to come back, but my pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I buried myself in distractions, shopping, meeting up with friends, scrolling endlessly on Instagram. But nothing worked. The house felt empty without Luke, and no amount of wine or Netflix marathons could fill the void. Weeks turned into a month, and the distance between Luke and me only grew. He came by to pick up Mason for their weekends together, but he barely looked at me when he did. I'd hear Mason laughing on the phone with him at night, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't that I didn't want Luke to be a good dad. I just hated the idea that he could still connect with Mason so easily while things between us felt impossible. One night, after Mason had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at my phone. My finger hovered over Luke's number. I wanted to call him, to ask him to come back, to tell him I'd change. But I didn't. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and scrolled through Instagram. The next day, Mason came home from school with a big smile on his face. "Dad says we're going to the aquarium this weekend," he said, bouncing with excitement. "That's great," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll have fun." But inside, I felt like someone had twisted a knife in my chest. Luke was moving on, living his life without me, and it seemed easier for him. A week later, Luke came by to drop off Mason after their weekend together. For the first time in weeks, he lingered at the door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone neutral but serious. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had so many arguments, and he folded his hands in front of him. "I've been thinking a lot," he started, his voice calm but firm. "And I think it's time we make some decisions." "Decisions?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "I don't think this is working, Rachel," he said, meeting my eyes. "I think we need to move forward with a divorce." The words hit me like a freight train. "A divorce?" I repeated, my voice shaky. He nodded. "I've tried to make this work. I really have. But I think we've both known for a while that this isn't healthy, for either of us." My chest tightened and I felt tears welling up. "Luke, I can change," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll do better, I swear." "Just don't do this," he sighed, running a hand over his head. "I don't doubt you can change," he said. "But I don't think you want to, not really. And even if you did, I think it's too late for us." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down I knew he wasn't. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he said, his voice soft. "But love isn't enough anymore." He stood up, and for a moment I thought about reaching for his hand, about begging him to stay. But I didn't. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Luke didn't fight me on anything, alimony, custody, nothing. He just let it happen. By then, he'd moved into a small apartment near the city. I heard through mutual friends that he was seeing someone new, a woman named Erin. She was younger than me, of course, and from what I'd heard, she was sweet and supportive in all the ways I wasn't. Meanwhile, I stayed in the house. Alone. The house felt like a monument to a life that no longer existed. The silence was deafening, and the emptiness was overwhelming. I tried to distract myself, shopping, meeting up with friends, but nothing filled the void. My friends stopped inviting me to things, and my attempts at dating fizzled out quickly. Men didn't find my bluntness or sarcasm charming the way Luke once had. Months turned into a year, and I heard that Luke had gotten a promotion. He and Erin were traveling, going on the kinds of adventures I'd always dreamed of but never saved enough money for. Every time I saw a picture of them on social media, her beaming up at him like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her, I felt a sharp pang of jealousy. Not because I wanted him back, I told myself, but because I hated the idea that he was happier without me. As for me, I was still here in the same house trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I knew the answer, of course. It had gone wrong because I hadn't listened, because I hadn't taken him seriously until it was too late. I'd pushed him too far, and when he finally snapped, I wasn't ready for it. Now I was alone with nothing but my regrets to keep me company. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself.